Hey guys, if you've been using a Raspberry Pi for a while, you probably know that it uses a micro SD card for booting the operating system. And that's fine for basic tasks, but solid state drives and faster USB drives can drastically improve those transfer speeds. And you can even upgrade your storage. So if you have a newer Raspberry Pi model, why not make the switch and boot using USB? So the first process I'll be going over is specifically for the Raspberry Pi 4 and the Raspberry Pi 5 models. We're going to start by downloading the Raspberry Pi Imager tool from the official Raspberry Pi website, and then get it installed on your computer. And once you launch it, click on Choose Device and select either Raspberry Pi 4 or 5, depending on what you have. Then click Choose OS and then select the MISC Utility Images option. Now click on bootloader for either the Raspberry Pi 5 or the Raspberry Pi 4 family. Next, choose the NVMe USB option. Keep in mind that if you have a Raspberry Pi 4, it might just appear as USB boot. Now let's click Choose Storage from the imager and select the micro SD card where you want to create the USB boot utility. Yup, you heard it right. Even though we want to boot from a USB drive, we need to first focus on the micro SD card, because this is what's going to tell your Raspberry Pi to change its boot instructions later to use USB. Okay, so with everything set up, let's click Next to get the flashing started. Choose Yes when you get prompted here for a confirmation. And it might take a moment to flash, but once the tool finishes, unplug your micro SD card and insert it into your Raspberry Pi. Keep in mind that you'll need to wait for around 30 seconds or more, because you do need to give your Raspberry Pi a chance to switch the startup priority from the micro SD card to the USB drive. And once this is done, you can remove the micro SD card and insert your SSD or any USB drive that has the Raspberry Pi OS. If you don't have this ready, just follow my video for flashing Raspbian OS. But instead, substitute using a micro SD card with a USB drive. Again, this method of booting from USB is pretty straightforward, but it only works on the Raspberry Pi 4 or the Raspberry Pi 5 models. But if you have an older Raspberry Pi board, there's an alternative method that you can follow. Let's go over that. First, we need to upgrade the package list on a Raspberry Pi using sudo apt-get update. After that, let's run an upgrade command using sudo apt-get upgrade to make sure that all the outdated packages on a Raspberry Pi are up to date. For the next step, we need to enable USB boot mode on your Raspberry Pi, and you can do this by running the following command. This adds the USB boot mode option to the end of the boot config file. Not to confuse you, but this is going to be saved in your Raspberry Pi's OTP or one-time programmable memory. And that's what's ultimately telling your Pi to boot from a USB storage device. Now it's time to reboot the Raspberry Pi using sudo reboot. And once your device is up and running again, let's run the following command to check if the right boot mode is enabled. And if this worked successfully, the output of that command should be a 302, 4 zeros, and an A. At this point, you can turn off your Raspberry Pi using sudo shutdown, and we'll switch our attention to the USB drive. You'll need to make sure that you have a USB device that's flashed with the Raspbian OS. But if you're not too sure, it's the exact same process that you would follow from my previous videos, but instead, you would substitute the micro SD card with a USB device. But if you have the USB device flashed and ready, try plugging it into your Raspberry Pi and it'll automatically boot using that instead. Switching your boot option to a USB drive, especially if it's an SSD, can make your Raspberry Pi blazing fast. So I hope this helped you follow the process while doing it yourself, or at least become familiar with some of the steps involved for booting from a USB drive. Thanks for watching, and for more on Raspberry Pi, please consider subscribing to this channel.